Welcome to the show, Bevis Griffin. You are a musician and educator and have been honoured by the city of Austin, Texas, as a musician of influence for over 25 years of musical contributions, as one of the earliest pioneers of Texas glam rock, punk rock and hard rock. You've been described and regarded as the black rock maverick of Texas and a champion of alternative black culture, inspired by the likes of Jimi Hendrix, David Bowie and Sly Stone, among others. There's loads to talk about with you. Thank you so much for joining us, and please do tell us more.
Well, the pleasure's mine. I can only tell you that I'm currently engaged and focused on getting my autobiography called Memoirs of a Black Rock Maverick published for mass consumption for the duration of this year. So pursuant to that, we have an event scheduled here in Austin, Texas at the Texas Music Museum, sponsored by Texas State University history PhD and director Jason Mallard, who's actually quite an Anglophile because he spent extensive time in the UK touring the islands last year on an academic sojourn. So he had great connectivity to like the core of my nascent journey here in Texas, because I found myself in a very peculiar juxtaposition with regard to like cultural paradigm shifts back in 1972, so to speak, because I had only graduated high school in 1970 in a smaller town called Wichita Falls, Texas, which is in North Texas, closer to the Oklahoma City border, after being transplanted from Los Angeles, California, where I was originally born and raised. So I try to tell a story that gives a perspective to, especially to like younger audiences, that my journey was essentially fueled with a strong sense of like self-determination, because I was essentially raised with no predilection or preconceived anxiety about interracial social interactions, right? Both of my parents being from the South and being raised in the 30s had experienced, the brunt of like Jim Crow racism, which was pervasive in the United States in the early part of the 20th century. So them relocating from the South to the West Coast was an attempt for them to find a more promising future, to raise a family, without the social injustices being so predominant in the environment, right? I was fortunate being born in 1953. As you know, 53 was really about the beginning of the onset of the first wave of rock and roll music. As a baby, I benefited from that because I had this rock and roll music vibrant in my household. And so there was, all the usual records. I think my favorite record as a child was probably Great Balls of Fire by Jerry Lee Lewis. I just loved Jerry Lee Lewis. I loved Little Richard. And then subsequently Chuck Berry, Bo Diddley was another personal favorite. So we had that same inspirational thrust that inspired the British invasion and the bands such as the Rolling Stones and Beatles in the aftermath of the nuclear explosion of the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show, in 1964. It was a shockwave. I was only 10, when the Beatles hit the television situation. So I had a little ways to go. But I was already a pretty avid music fan because my father had a barbershop situated in close proximity to a very popular R&B nightclub in Los Angeles called the 5-4 Ballroom. So it was just really fortuitous that, my father's clientele were people like Ike and Tina Turner and Bobby Blue Bland and B.B. King and just a whole litany, of what I call A-list R&B icons, right? These people were actually friends of my dad when I was a child. And so even before I started public school, before I even started going to kindergarten, I would spend most of my afternoons at my dad's barbershop in lieu of being with a babysitter or in a quote unquote daycare setting, because both my parents were working. So my dad, was like my daykeeper. I'm in his environment. His environment is like rife with all these musicians. As a barber, musicians like to get sharp for the shows. And of course they love to gamble. And my dad was a big, gambling facilitator. I'll put it that way, so he had dice games and things going in the back room all the time, had a pool table in his barber shop, so there was just all sorts of male hustling activity going on around the barber shop. And for me, my magnetic attraction was the jukebox that he maintained in the barbershop. And my daily occupation was primarily, I was the DJ for the barbershop, right? Because they set up step stool for me to get up to
put you to work, huh?
see the dashboard, and they'd give me the quarters and the dimes to keep the music just pumping. And I got familiar with the with the index of the jukebox to the point to where I could really just keep music going nonstop, right? Because favorite songs. Yeah, well, you could just say that was a heavy duty influence, on my personal sensibility. And that paired up with the fact that before the FM radio trend of the 70s really started, right? AM radio was fairly homogenous. You could routinely listen to music from the British Invasion playlist alongside Motown playlist, alongside things like James Brown. And so you had a really great homogeny of pop culture, right? And just continual hourly cycles. So I grew up, enjoying the music of the Everly Brothers, the same as I did the music of the Supremes, the same as I did the music of the Dave Clark Five, for instance. It was all, part and parcel of one stream of consciousness for me. So that made a really big influence on me. And as I moved through school, because I had early musical training in classical music, I had the sight read because I used to be part of a junior symphony ensemble in junior high school before I came to Texas. Well, when I got to Texas, the landscape was markedly more barren, so to speak, from a cultural standpoint. Mm-hmm. The sea change for me was the after effect or the aftermath of the Watts riot, which occurred in 1965, which was social upheaval that essentially decimated the majority of what I call the commercial infrastructure of the South Central Los Angeles area. It was a huge event. It wasn't just a few blocks, right? It was
no, it was real. I'm from California too.
10 square miles of destruction, you know what I'm saying? So when you lose the natural infrastructure of a community, such as your grocery stores, such as, your pharmacies, let alone, your retail outlets, that you take for granted, right? When all that stuff is decimated, it's extremely stressful on a parental household basis. And I think that was really one of the negative influences that kind of caused my parents to split. And so when my parents separated, my mother took my younger siblings back to Texas where her family was rooted so that she could get a second breath and kind of reset her course correction. She took the 3 younger siblings with her. I originally intended to stay behind in Los Angeles because at that time I was about 13. Where you really start to feel your independence a little bit. Yeah. Already kind of got your friendship cliques together, you know what I mean? And I was really reluctant to just sever that and go to a situation and start all over. My mother enticed me. If I would come to Texas, she would help me get a set of drums. And that was a carrot that tipped the scale in her favor. Yeah. Not that I love my mother anyway, you know what I'm saying? But, when you're 13, right, you're pretty easily incentivized with materials. Right? That was kind of the tipping point. So that drew me to Texas. And subsequently, I just kind of, in sacrifice of my social relationships, I took that new environment and put my fixation on learning to play the drums and trying to discover more and more of the new music that was proliferating at the time. Because I say it time and time again, I was just so fortunate that I kind of hit that vector of development at a point where the cultural explosion of musical diversity was at an all-time high. Being younger, right, it's like I knew about Jimi Hendrix, but I didn't really have firsthand exposure to him other than what I would see in news clips. And then as I got a little older and more interested in music, and I started to really kind of trove for, music magazines or pop culture magazines and things like that. And I just kept seeing this guy, Jimi Hendrix. It just resonated with me personally because he kind of looked like my dad. And it's the same way that Sly Stone struck me that way, you know? And having these two huge iconic figures in the pop zeitgeist at a point where we were still, in a revolutionary state as far as the grassroots, I mean, Martin Luther King was only assassinated in 1968.
That's right.
You understand what I'm saying? And in 1968, Hendrix was really starting to ascend as like a dominant rock figure, you know, in the United States, having come from England and debuting at Monterey Pop in 1967, right? So Hendrix was like riding this crest of ascending, you know, pop culture excitement, right?
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, he was almost radio silent in the Black community.
Absolutely,
man.
Yeah.
While all of that was going on in the general zeitgeist, the Black community was all but, you know, oblivious to the fact that Jimi.
And look where he did it at in Seattle, right?
Well,
My
yeah, I mean,
in Seattle, you know, and my aunt used to cook for him. He went.
Is that right?
No, yeah. My cousins went to school with him at Garfield, right across the street from my aunt's house.
Oh, wow.
So he would come over because he lived too far, and my aunt would just cook for him, right? So for lunchtime, because it was right across the street, you know.
Wow.
And I did a concert for 40,000 people, where I sang "Little Wings" with Ann Wilson from Heart. We did a duet for Jimi Hendrix's father, and they brought him out on the stage, and they had a crown on his head. It's 40,000 people out there, and we did "Little Wings," man, with the original members of Jimmy. Yeah, man, it's some history. I'll tell you about that. And you know, I was on tour with Sly in 2007. I brought Sly, and me and his sister brought him back to the stage for 13 gigs.
Oh my God!
Get one in.
Well, I just want to. I mean, your influences. I'm rather interested by the fact that you know, glam rock and punk rock and all that very much kind of different elements of rock. I mean, was that kind of, as you kind of intimated there, you know, a testament to the sort of music you were listening to, or what was the kind of draw behind that?
Well, yeah. I mean, see, to try to make a long story short, so I don't want to have to arrest this puppy because he might start to act up. To make a fairly long and broad story short, by the time I had gotten proficient enough on drums, post graduating high school, right, I had an opportunity to go out on, you know, a pretty substantial national tour with a blues band outfit, you know, that was supporting a blues singer named O.V. Wright. So it was my maiden voyage into the quote unquote real world of music, you know what I'm saying? And, but I was going coast to coast, and it was essentially what people would refer to in retrospect as like the Chitlin circuit, right? It wasn't like we were playing high caliber arenas or high caliber theaters. You know, we were playing smaller nightclubs in Black neighborhoods. The money was always sketchy. You know what I mean? It was not anything.
I pay you Wednesday.
You know what I'm saying? It was always just a rolling situation, you know, where you had to like go with the flow or just get off, you know what I mean? And I was just young enough to where I had the stamina to just kind of ride the currents, as they say, you know what I'm saying? But it got to a point where by November, I think we started this tour in late summer, and by November, it had gotten to a point to where there was just too many gaps between paydays, you know, while we were supposed to be a working ensemble, you know. So I called my mother back in Wichita Falls to let her know I was thinking about, you know, making an adjustment. And she said, you know, this friend of yours from school's been calling me, and he's moved to Austin, Texas. He's trying to get in touch with you. Please give him a call so he'll leave me alone. Like that sort of thing. Right? And I called my friend Jimmy Siraj, who had already kind of established himself as a live performer while I was still in high school. He's just a couple of years older than me, but I graduated high school as the youngest in my senior class. Okay. Because I took accelerated courses in the transition between California and Texas, right? So I was 17 when I got this note from my mom. I called my friend Jimmy in November of 71. He's like, yeah, I'm down here in Austin. I don't think my drummer is going to cut it. I think he wants to go back to college or whatever the situation was. Would you be interested in coming down and join me? I said, yeah, you know, if you could basically send me a little extra money for the bus ticket, and I'll put my
I'm
drums
outta
on the bus and we'll come on down, and see
Yeah.
what's going on, because things are getting pretty thin up here. Plus,
Yeah.
it was wintertime in Ohio, and you know what that could be like, right? So I made the pivot, came down, and it turns out he didn't even really have an apartment. He was staying in what we call a storage unit, on the east side of town. It was like a 25 by 35 storage locker where you keep furniture or something like that. Well, when you're a kid like that, you're just out of the house and you're not under any sort of parental supervision or guidance. So you just improvise, you know what I mean? And you just do what you got to do to get from day one to day two. So fast forward, we wound up in a situation where, because we were in an industrial storage facility, right, we could rehearse 24/7 without any complaints from neighbors. Wow. And that's essentially what we did.
Got tight.
Yeah, we would rehearse anywhere from 8 to 10 hours a day. Wow. For a couple of weeks, until we actually had what constituted a set of music. We had about 90 minutes worth of music to show. And then we got an invitation to apply for a Battle of the Bands competition at a legitimate nightclub. And so we did that, and we're fortunate that we had a major booking agent in the audience that saw us and approached us and said he wanted to sign us as a client.
The rest is history. After
one of those moments.
That was the kickstart. But it was so fortuitous, That's the genesis of my humble beginnings.
That's really cool.
Hey, man, and that sounds like a short time of your career, man. But listen, thank you for the privilege of your time for coming on our show, man.
Yeah,
and
appreciate you joining.
And Tom's going to get all your information so we can pass the blessings along.
I just want to know what platforms, if you're on any kind of social media or website, people can see what you're up to now, what you've been up to. Didn't really get to it, but I know obviously now you're very much more in the sort of educational arm and the different things that you're doing. So how can people see what it is you're doing?
Well, I do have a very visible Facebook page that's pretty accessible. I have a couple of websites. The educational page is called DVA Solutions. It's Divas, pronounced divassolutions.org, a very concise detail of music educational curriculum that I had been developing over the course of the past 3 years, because I had an interaction with an entity called School of Rock here in the United States. They're like a franchise music academy situation, and they had reached out during the pandemic saying that they wanted to try to elevate their students' awareness of the importance of Black culture in the formation of the rock and roll idiom, so to speak. And they really couldn't find a formal institution that had a platform, you know what I'm saying, for them to engage. So I subsequently had to build it. I work with some of my other colleagues. I'm a formative member of the Black Rock Coalition with Vernon Reed of Living Color.
My brother, thank you so much, man. We're going to get you back later, man, because there's so much more to talk to you about.
Appreciate the opportunity. Stay blessed. We'll talk again.
Namaste,
soon.
brother.
Music can save the world. Music can save the world. If we all get together, music can save the world. Yeah. Music can save the world. Save the world. There's an urgency facing our humanity.
Thank you so much for watching. To stay up to date, please click subscribe and hit the bell. You can also join our group on Facebook and find us on LinkedIn and Instagram.